The scientists are telling us this is the last decade we have. We either make it or we perish, or we leave the planet to perish, or we leave our children and grandchildren a dirty planet. And I don't think us as parents is what we want.
If we reduce emissions, it doesn't really matter where we're reducing those emissions. If I reduce emissions here in Costa Rica, you gentlemen will be benefited by those reductions in the UK and vice versa, because reduction of emissions get evenly distributed in the global atmosphere, right? So, so you can contribute globally to that reduction of emissions by just doing something that is local. That is not true for resilience. Resilience and restoration of the natural buffering capacity of nature has to be done locally and has to be done ecosystem by ecosystem, infrastructure by infrastructure. It's not, climate change is global, but the negative effects of climate change are local.
For some communities, climate change is a future hypothetical event. For Phoenix, it is something that is our everyday reality and we prepare for it. I think that's part of the reason that we are coming up with different solutions, and we've elected so many people with climate change and sustainability backgrounds. I hold an environmental degree and worked in renewable energy before running for office. Tom, you know, Councilwoman Yasmin Ansari, who worked globally on climate change issues. And I think our residents really have the political support for wanting us to do more on heat and climate change. So that's part of the reason we're #1 for solar installed on city buildings. We have a robust heat response strategy, which we share regularly with communities that are facing those threats, particularly all over the United States, but occasionally all over the world. We're leaders in areas like cool pavement and solar fintech. So we know we have to come up with solutions. Climate change is something we feel is politically important, but also to our everyday livability as a community. And so we hope Phoenix will be part of the solution.
How have you seen, have you seen the issue of climate change divides your community as the weather is getting more extreme? Is there a general realization of what's happening? Because that was always the belief, right, amongst certain people, that as the events got more extreme, then that would mean reality would break through. Do you see that occurring, or is it leading to division?
My father fancies himself a political consultant, and he says, if I can just do something about the heat in Phoenix, I'll have a great political career. Climate change is a political issue, and I would say different political parties talk about it differently. There are some parts, such as solar energy, that have very broad support. So we have multiple Republicans running for statewide office now who have either been solar lobbyists or run solar companies, and that type of innovation and clean tech gets wide support. Electric vehicles get wide support across political parties. But when you talk about government regulation, you do see more divisions. So I think there is wide realization that we ought to do something about heat and that it is something that needs to be managed, but really different perspectives on what are the appropriate tools to do so. There is still a little bit of divisions about whether human beings are causing climate change. I feel like overwhelmingly, we're moving towards more and more people believing the scientific consensus, which I certainly hope to do my part as elected official to promote. But I think if we are mindful that there are different perspectives, but we all agree we need solutions, then we can get things done in a purple state.
I'm out there to talk to and hear from really the vulnerable countries. So, you know, developing countries, mostly, who are at that front end of climate shock risk, and to genuinely understand both where they feel the problems are, to understand what their capacity is to do something about it, and to understand, really importantly, where they can't do that without help from external sources, and to really try and then link up and work across the globe with donor countries, with the private sector, with the insurance sector, sharing knowledge between different countries.
To strengthen leadership voice in Africa is extremely important. And that for me is very critical, especially among African cities, to mainstream the issues of climate change in their city management or development programs so that they can be more accountable, we can measure the impact and the interventions that we have made, over the years. And I'm happy that working with C40 City, we are doing this. And I'm willing to do more with the African cities on this so that all of us can be on the same page, like the way Europe is trying to do.
So in terms of timing, we have learned a lot from the last decade, where the world globally we have failed to reach the Aichi biodiversity targets fully, much as progress had been made. So building upon those lessons and learning from that, I don't think we want to go back. And we have seen, particularly this period of pandemic, as we have said, how it has created awareness and shown the importance of biodiversity and nature at all levels.
For climate, everybody knows about the 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius limit, right? For nature, it is the one thing that we need to agree this year is to commit to protect 30% of the planet, land and sea, by 2030.
And how are we doing on that one?
We are not doing so well on this one. We have protected 17% of the land and only 7% of the ocean. So we have to double the area that is protected on our land, and we have to quadruple the ocean area that is protected today. I think there is something that most people have overlooked, which is that if we protect coral reefs, we're going to make them more resilient. And I have seen coral reefs in the middle of the Pacific lose half of their corals because of a massive El Nino, a massive warming event in 2016. But I've been to places without people and places with people, places that are protected with a huge abundance of fish, including the sharks and all the big fish, and places that have been overfished. The overfished places where the corals died have not come back. The places that had the entire food web, the entire ecosystem with all the big fish, are bouncing back from that warming event, the largest we've seen in history, because we have all these big fish that eat the algae, the seaweed that would overgrow the dead corals, keeping the reef clean and allowing for the corals to come back. So it is biodiversity that provides the resilience in the ocean and coral reefs. So if we protect more coral reefs, we will be able to make them more resilient and buy time while we reduce emissions the way that Christiana was talking about. I think there is something that most people have overlooked, which is that if we protect coral reefs, we're going to make them more resilient. And I have seen coral reefs in the middle of the Pacific lose half of their corals because of a massive El Nino, a massive warming event in 2016. But I've been to places without people and places with people, places that are protected with a huge abundance of fish, including the sharks and all the big fish, and places that have been overfished. The overfished places where the corals died have not come back. The places that had the entire food web, the entire ecosystem with all the big fish, are bouncing back from that warming event, the largest we've seen in history, because we have all these big fish that eat the algae, the seaweed that would overgrow the dead corals, keeping the reef clean and allowing for the corals to come back. So it is biodiversity that provides the resilience in the ocean and coral reefs. So if we protect more coral reefs, we will be able to make them more resilient and buy time while we reduce emissions the way that Christiana was talking about.
We're just starting to recognize that we've been kind of atomized and separated by very individualized kind of capitalist enterprise, but we've absolutely got to think about international security in terms of ecological security. And we're going to have to see massive collaboration to essentially this protect 30% of ecosystems by 2030, 30% of land, 30% of sea. And that's achievable and fundamentally necessary. And if we think about it like a national security challenge, it'll just happen.